Craig Garrison, City Planner with the City of Corpus Christi. We do have a quorum, and currently we do have Randy Dees as our chairman today, unless Commissioner Riser Robbins is available. Hi.
Okay, I suppose we're waiting on her through WebEx.
Since we do have a quorum, we can go ahead and call roll.
Go ahead and start.
And if she does come, that'd be great. So.
All right, so I guess we'll call this meeting to order. We're right at 4:30, 4:32 it looks like. May we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Chair Robbins. Vice Chairman Dees.
I'm here.
Commissioner Freeman. Commissioner De La Garza.
Present.
Commissioner Fontenot.
Present.
Commissioner Brown.
Present.
Commissioner Mendez.
Present.
Commissioner Wanzer. And Commissioner Wilson.
Present.
Quorum established.
All right. Let's move on to the approval of minutes of the last meeting. It's been June 24th. Let's look them over and see if anybody needs to make any adjustments or changes. If they look good, let's get a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Commissioner Fontenot, I second.
All right. Can we do a show of hands, or do we need a roll call?
Roll call is not necessary.
Okay, just aye or show of hands on approving the minutes?
Yes, sir.
Aye.
Aye.
Minutes have been
Aye.
approved. All right. Let's see, do we have any? We didn't have any absences last meeting. So we'll move on to number 3, to public comment. Do you know of any public comment?
Staff has not received any public comment via email or in person, and we do not have anybody attending the commission today.
I don't see anybody. All right, so let's move right on to public hearing, and this is the discussion and consideration of the ordinance that'll be adopting the new City of Corpus Christi Historic Preservation Plan, an element of Plan CC Comprehensive Plan, rescinding the former Preservation Plan adopted in 1976.
Yes, sir.
So,
And we do have Steph McDougall on WebEx from McDougall Preservation. And on your screens in front of you, you will have the PowerPoint presentation so you can view that. And Steph, are you all available?
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to start sharing that when you're ready, Craig.
Perfect. I'm going to wait for IT to kind of give me the signal that we're sharing to y'all's screens. Or commissioners, you can let me know once you see a PowerPoint. Perfect. You're good to go, Steph.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm pleased to be here with you again this evening to review the draft preservation plan that was published for comment last month. This is going to be basically the same presentation that I gave at your June meeting. We'll just go over all that again in case anybody has any questions or we do receive any additional comments from members of the public. And just as a reminder, this is online and can be downloaded and viewed at cctexas.com/HPP for Historic Preservation Plan. I'm going to very quickly walk you through what's in the plan. We'll talk about what that means, how you would use a plan like this, and then next steps. So there will be time, of course, at the end for questions and answers. If anybody's viewing this from home, you can submit questions anytime during this presentation. I believe Craig can take those through Facebook or email at dsoutreach@cctexas.com. All right, so just very quickly, for those of you who may not have heard about this project before tonight, I want to make sure that I summarize it very quickly so that we're all on the same page. This is the third historic preservation plan undertaken by the city of Corpus Christi in the past 50 years, and the previous plans were adopted in 1974 and 1992 respectively. So we're making some of the same recommendations that appear in those previous plans because those recommendations were not adopted back in the 1970s or the 1990s. However, especially today, historic preservation is a very effective economic development tool. And so we're repeating those recommendations in the hopes that the city will be able to and be in a position to take action on them today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. This project began last fall in 2020, and we are on schedule to complete it by the end of September, as per the certified local government grant that's paying for a portion of this. So here is what we've done in the plan. We began by reviewing the history of historic preservation in Corpus Christi. We wanted to understand what has happened in the past, what has not happened. For example, Corpus Christi has the ability to designate historic districts, has designated none so far, and has only designated a small number of historic landmarks. And as I mentioned last time, that's really unusual for a city of your size that's been, or really of any size, that's been doing historic preservation for as long as Corpus Christi has. So we wanted to understand a little bit better what the factors might have been that were contributing to that, and provided a report on that to the city. We then conducted telephone interviews with more than 24 stakeholders, and we wanted to know what the community values in terms of the kind of places and spaces that people would want to keep around for future generations. And we wanted to also look at what subsets of the community value. I'm sorry, was there a comment? Okay, sorry. And then from those stakeholder interviews, we got a ton of great information. We used that to develop a community opinion survey. And this is really important because this is what drives what's in the historic preservation plan. More than 750 people participated in the survey, which is a very large number compared to typical response rates, even for other Corpus Christi surveys. We did make it available in English and Spanish. It was available through the public library system, online and in hard copy. And I think that's a big part of why it was responded to in those really great numbers. I want to also thank everyone who took the time to fill out the survey, which is very helpful. And you'll see the recommendations and the opinions expressed in that survey are in the plan. And finally, we prepared the preservation plan document. As I said before, we published that in June, and we did not receive very many comments. We did receive one question, and I'm going to deal with that here in a little bit. So just going over what's in the plan, obviously there's an introduction. We talked about our methodology, what we've done to get to this point. We've summarized all of the community input that we received, and then used that as a springboard to talk about these very broad goals, which I'll go over in a minute, and then strategies and action items to get to the achievement of those goals. And finally, we've provided some case studies for each of those strategies to help you see how other cities have done the same things that we're recommending for Corpus Christi. So the vision statement is that by 2030, historic preservation in Corpus Christi will support a vibrant, multicultural community enjoyed by residents and visitors alike, with a thriving downtown, diversified economy, updated infrastructure, and equitable investment in new and legacy neighborhoods. Those ideas are directly from the survey. This is what the community said they want for Corpus Christi when it comes to the city overall, not just historic preservation, but what they want for the city. So how do we get there using historic preservation as a tool? Well, there are really three different things have to happen. The first thing is we've got to build some city capacity for historic preservation. There are some current city ordinances and things like that that are obstacles to preservation to some extent. We need to fix that kind of thing. And then we really need to enable and empower the community to be driving historic preservation. So in some cases, in some places, the city is really behind all of the historic preservation. It's really unusual. It's not usually very successful. What you really want is for the community to be driving that bus. So, and the city to make it possible. And that's what we're advocating for here. And then finally, we want to support historic preservation as an economic development tool. That is really where we're at with historic preservation these days. We are not going around saying, oh, we should do historic preservation because it's cute, it's quaint. Oh, you know, it's such a nice old house. No, we're looking at what are the real economic benefits of preserving our built legacy, our built heritage, and they are documented. Study after study shows that preserving old buildings, preserving the historic fabric of a downtown, of a city, of a residential neighborhood pays off through higher property values, more heritage tourism, lots of good things. So we're going to explore a little bit here in a minute how we're recommending you do that. So we broke this down into strategies. You'll see that on each of these pages of each slide, down here at the bottom, it says goal 1, building city capacity. And these strategies are the ones that go with that goal. That's how we're going to accomplish that. And staff is on board with all of this stuff. So, you know, this is not something that I came to the table and said, you know what you really need to do without staff agreeing also. So strategy number 1 is that the city of Corpus Christi really needs to hire a full-time historic preservation officer who can see this stuff through. One of the reasons that we think that some of these same kinds of suggestions or recommendations from previous plans were not implemented was because there was not a person who could be dedicated to that. And in most cities, there is at least one person on the city planning staff who is the city's historic preservation officer. So even in smaller cities, they usually have an HPO that's full-time in that position. And that would help tremendously get some of these things done. The second thing that we're recommending is that the historic preservation ordinance be updated. And specifically, what we want to see is what we're recommending is that the city follow Houston's lead and add two additional designations of protected landmarks and protected historic districts. So like Corpus Christi for many years, Houston also had landmarks and districts that had really very little protection. They had a 90-day or a 120-day delay before the property owner could proceed with whatever they had applied to do, regardless of what the Landmark Commission had said. The Landmark Commission's decision was really not binding at all. So what we're recommending is not to just change all of the landmarks and any future districts to that, or to a protected status, but to add the possibility that if someone wants to protect their investment in a historic building and all the money they may have put into restoring it, rehabilitating it, that they have the ability to do that. And in that case, if something was a protected landmark or within a protected historic district, when a property owner comes to the Landmark Commission with a certificate of appropriateness application, If the Landmark Commission says no and denies that application, that's binding. The decision could be appealed, but when that's appealed, it's not saying, hey, city council, tell us if you think it was the right decision. It's based on, did they follow the process in the ordinance? So it's really important to have these. In Houston, where we saw none of this before 2010, there were just tear downs and redevelopments and really inappropriate additions all over the place, to the extent that some historic districts were really decimated. Now that they have protected landmarks and protected historic districts, that has stopped. And so you can still add on to a house. You can still, tear down a house potentially, but you have to go through the proper procedures. There is an economic hardship clause, but there's also a clause in there to prevent demolition by neglect, where somebody just lets their house fall down until they say, well, we can't, it's not, economically feasible to fix it. So really that's where modern historic preservation ordinances are. I think what Corpus has in its preservation ordinance, it was very typical in like the 1980s and 1990s, but that's not where we are in 2021. So we're recommending that the city update its ordinance to function like really almost every city in other places in the country. So the third strategy is to update your commission bylaws and training requirements to make them match what's required by the Certified Local Governments program. So currently the CLG program requires that you have annual training, but your own bylaws only require that every 2 years. It's very important for Landmark Commission and staff to get regular training to help you make good decisions, understand how the laws maybe are changing and things like that. So we want to make sure that you're getting that annually and that you continue to qualify for the CLG program. Strategy 4 has to do with planning for disasters. The city really already has that underway and in hand through the Hazard Mitigation Action Plan. The state Historic Preservation Office, the Texas Historical Commission, is going to be undertaking a statewide preservation plan that will include a whole bunch of resources for property owners about how to deal with disaster recovery and preparedness. So we're not suggesting that the city of Corpus Christi duplicate any of those efforts. However, there are things that you can do to help owners of historic properties in particular prepare and be ready for recovery and disaster response. One of the things that we're recommending is that the city work with the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association to create a Texas windstorm exemption program. Cities like Brownsville and Galveston already have this, where a property owner can apply for an exemption so that in the event of a hurricane damaging their building, they can fix it with, for example, repaired windows that would not necessarily meet the windstorm certification requirements that we have today, but that are appropriate for that historic building. So it's pretty simple to do. That is something easy that we think would be a benefit for historic property owners in Corpus Christi. And then there are also some flood recovery things in there as well. And then finally, the last goal or strategy for this goal, building city capacity, is that we're suggesting the city planning staff work with the CVB to develop walking tours of historic areas, really start boosting historic preservation tourism in Corpus Christi. We know, because there have been so many studies across the country, that heritage tourists stay longer, spend more money, um, and uh, and really contribute more to the local economy than a lot of other tourists. So the more we can support them and give them a lot of things to look at, the better. Okay. The second goal is enabling community-driven preservation. Again, 5 more goals here. The first one, strategies, I'm sorry. The first one, strategy 6. We see this a lot with city websites where the information about historic preservation is not all in one place. That's the case with Corpus Christi's website. It's not as easy to find information about rules and how you designate a building, how you apply for a certificate of appropriateness, et cetera, as it could be. So we've got some recommendations in there to make that a little bit easier for the public. We also are recommending that the city standardize its public engagement process so that people know what to expect every single time, and it's easier for staff to implement if it's a replicable process. We want to improve community outreach. There are a lot of ways to do that. Generally, you build trust with the community by communicating with them, being transparent and being accountable, and improving your community outreach makes a big difference for that. So we've got some recommendations in there for how the city can do a better job. Again, like the website, there's already good work being done, but there are areas for improvement. Strategy 8, and this is super important. Almost every other city that's really doing historic preservation effectively has a private nonprofit partner at the local level. Preservation Houston, Preservation Dallas, the Plano Conservancy for Historic Preservation, Preservation Austin, the San Antonio Conservation Society, you name it. Every city, pretty much, from big ones to small ones, has a local preservation nonprofit partner that works with the city to further their goals. So we're really recommending that the city help facilitate the creation of one of those organizations. And more than 200 people in the survey said, we want to get involved. Here's how you can contact me. Here's my email address. Here's my phone number. So we've got all those. I've passed all of those along to the city so they can get a hold of everybody when a local nonprofit organization gets going. So I think a lot of good things can happen coming out of that. Strategy 9. So in the past really 2 or 3 years in the historic preservation profession, we've been talking a lot more about equity for what is sometimes called underrepresented and probably more accurately called historically excluded communities. In historic preservation, which really got going, of course, during the time when segregation was still prevalent in America, for many, many years, most of what we recognized as important and preserved was associated with wealthy white men. Over the years, however, that's been changing. Now we are really interested in everybody's story and telling the whole story. So there are things that the city of Corpus Christi can do to take an equitable approach to historic preservation for all neighborhoods, and that includes new ones and existing ones, to make sure that investment is happening equitably, and that residents get to define what that means for them, rather than the city just coming in saying, you know, we've decided that to make everything equitable, this is what we're going to do. So we've got a bunch of information in there about that. The planning department agrees that equity needs to be the purview of the Landmark Commission. And so what some commissions do is look at what's already been designated and say, you know, does this represent all of our community members? Do we have markers for Black people and Mexican people as well as just white Anglo people? What neighborhoods get designated as historic districts first, et cetera? Whose history are we telling? Because we want to be inclusive and tell the whole story. That's all of our history. And finally, strategy 10, there's an opportunity to work with the Nueces County Historical Commission to develop a thematic approach to new historical markers that support heritage tourism. Your commission, your County Historical Commission, is a champion at getting historic markers. They know how to do it. They're great at it. They do that all the time. And there's an opportunity for the city to say, you know what, we are interested in, for example, looking at Mexican-American entrepreneurs and recognizing their businesses, that have been around forever. That's something where the city could work with the CHC to develop some thematic information and identify places where those markers could go, working with the community, of course. So the only way you get markers at the state level is by going through the County Historical Commission. So we are encouraging the city to do that. And finally, third goal, this one has 6 strategies. Number 1, promote historic preservation as an economic development tool. There is so much money out there in terms of financial incentives for buildings that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. That's your ticket to federal and state tax incentives. You can get up to 45% of your qualifying rehabilitation expenses back as a tax credit if you're an income producing property. If you're a nonprofit, you can still take advantage of the state program and get 25% of your qualifying rehab expenses back as a tax credit. And you can think of those as kind of like if you get a gift card. Well, if you got a gift card from Olive Garden and you don't go to Olive Garden, you could sell it to somebody and you might not get 100% of the value of that, but you would get a lot. And that's really how the tax credit program works. At the state level, you can transfer those tax credits like selling a gift card, and those are trading at about 92 cents on the dollar now. So you can get a lot of your money back for economic development, and investors look at the deal stack, which includes things like property tax incentives at the local level, federal and state tax credits. There are other tax breaks depending on what you do. If your property is already on the National Register and it is not a residential property, you do not have to pay sales tax on construction labor. So there are a lot of different ways to save money if you're doing economic development, rehabilitating a property, bringing a vacant property back into productive use if it's on the National Register. And that's why we're really encouraging the city to focus mostly on National Register listings to make sure that as many properties in Corpus Christi are eligible for those incentives as possible. But there are some other things that need to be done. Number 12, fix the vacant building ordinance. So when this was originally proposed, it was proposed with a vacant building registration program like they have in San Antonio and other cities. And it's my understanding that that was voted down in part because of pressure from the real estate community. But that ordinance is not working. It is encouraging demolition instead of adaptive reuse. So that needs to be fixed. We've got some information in there about that. Strategy 13, one of the best ways that the city can help get things on the National Register is to make a small investment in historic resources surveys and multiple property listings to the National Register. That's where you do a little bit of work and you put a whole bunch of things either on the register or identify them as eligible. And then individual property owners can nominate their own buildings if they want to also. So we have seen, for example, in Tulsa, the city of Tulsa made an investment of less than $100,000, and that's resulted in millions of dollars of investment in their downtown because things were eligible for those tax credits. So it's a really smart investment that pays off quickly over time. And we've got some information in there in the plan about that in the case study. Strategy 14, local tax incentive programs. Lots of cities all over Texas have these. There's about 75 cities in Texas that have these now. That's generally a tax exemption, which means that you don't pay a portion of the property tax that is assessed on the property. Typically, that's based on somebody making improvements to the property, and it runs for 10 or 15 years. Another option is to freeze the appraisal value at the pre-improvement level so that people aren't penalized with property taxes for fixing up their property. There are a lot of different ways to encourage improvements to properties through the exemption or abatement of local property taxes. And we've got a bunch of examples in there for you to consider. But we're recommending that is the thing that the city take up buildings. So we're recommending that a second program could be developed outside the TERS that could be administered by the downtown management district. I've talked to Alyssa Mason about that, and she said that's a fee for service that they could provide. And then finally, strategy 16, and this is one I want to talk about really specifically, support a few demonstration projects, catalytic projects that could show how preservation can spur economic growth. Now, the two that we've listed in the plan are the Ritz Theater and the Old County Courthouse. And I know that the Old County Courthouse is a contentious subject. However, it's really clear that if the city is not providing some subsidies or incentives, that's probably not going to happen. I know the county owns it. The city's already offered to waive outstanding property taxes, so that's a really big deal. So the investment of the city in a project like that to help get it moving along is one of the things that spurs additional investment by private entities. And that's what we see in theater restorations as well. The Ritz Theater was the #1 property that people in the survey said they wanted to see brought back into productive use. Far and away, more than any other properties. And we've seen across the country how restored theaters spur so much economic activity in the neighborhood around them because people are coming to the show, but they're paying to park. They're going to dinner beforehand. They're going to drinks afterwards. They're staying in hotels so they can see that show. It ripples throughout the community. And the League of Historic American Theaters' own studies about the economic impact of theater restoration shows that a restored theater can support 115 local jobs. So it's a big deal to consider investing in the restoration of the Ritz. Now, that could happen in a couple different ways. If we look at the Florida Theater in Jacksonville, Florida, it was very similar to the situation the Ritz was in, and they weren't having a lot of support at the nonprofit organization, the Conservancy that owns it. But when the city committed to give them $5 million as a reimbursement grant, $1 million a year for 5 years, then we started seeing corporate support flood in. We got a question about this from one community member who said, what are some examples of a city providing a nonprofit with this kind of support for the Ritz Theater? And this is a great example. The Florida Theater in Jacksonville, Florida, you can look it up. It was only recently that the city decided to make that commitment. But if you go on the Florida Theater's website and you look in the media section, look at the press, their press releases are corporations give support, corporation gives support, corporation gives support, corporation gives support. And that's all what happened after the city made a multi-million-dollar commitment to get that done. But here's the thing, that money, that investment gets paid back. The property values of buildings around that area rise, and that brings in additional property tax income to the city. There's more sales tax income to the city. People are working in areas around that. They're spending more money in the local economy. So I know that in some cases, people are hesitant for the city to make an investment into these kind of catalytic projects. But I think that reimbursement approach, saying we'll earmark this money for this project, but the organization has to raise and spend X number of dollars, and then we'll pay them that. I think that's a safe way to go. And we've included a whole bunch of modeling about how long it takes the city to recoup those investments. Now, if the Ritz is, for example, purchased by a developer, an investor, not to redevelop it as something else, tear it down, but to turn it back into a working performance space, a music hall, that kind of thing, then we've calculated that it's going to take about 4.5 years for the city to recoup an investment in that. You're going to get it back in property tax and sales tax pretty quickly. So we feel pretty strongly about this because we've seen it work in other places. And there are, examples all across America of places where the city made an investment, got this kind of historic theater space going again. It's something that benefits the public. It benefits the whole city. It benefits other businesses. And so that's why it's in there. So I'm going to be happy to take additional questions about that at the end. But right now, I'm going to move on real quickly. Okay, so for the strategies, for each strategy, we have given you action items specifically. What do we think you need to do to get this done? Here's an example. Of course, those are for all of the different strategies. And we also provided case studies from other cities. We tried to do this mostly in Texas, but we also looked at comparable examples around the country that were especially good. And this is the extent of the public comments that we've received, 4 of them. Plan is looking great. I support tax incentives. What needs to happen for Del Mar to become a historic district? And what would you imagine city participation would look like in the Ritz? Can you share some examples? And so we've done that. So here's the approval process. Tonight's meeting, we have a public hearing. This will go to the Planning Commission on August 4th, and then to council sometime in September. And so there are opportunities to continue to make changes to that really up until the time that council decides how it's going to proceed. So your action options tonight are to approve it as is, to approve it with amendments, or to deny it. Just really quickly, let me tell everybody that if you're out in the public and you have questions or comments, Craig Garrison is your man at the Development Services Department, and here's how you can reach him. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you all.
Thank you, Steph, so much for that presentation. Pardon me. I do believe we can have commission deliberation, questions and comments directed at staff.
We need to open the public hearing and close the public hearing also. This is a public hearing item.
Thank you.
Okay, so we basically just had a public hearing, but I guess we'll open it for discussion at this time. Anybody has anything they want to add to this or comments they want to make? Maybe you've looked over the ordinance that's going to be presented to the city. There's a copy of that.
And this would just be a formality of opening the public hearing, and since nobody's present, you can just close it.
Exactly. So the public hearing is closed.
Okay, thank you.
And, but do we have any comments or suggestions or anything from the commission?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Brown, and I just had some comments. I wanted to thank the consultant staff and all the city staff for putting this plan together. I was really impressed by it. They did excellent work, and what I thought was kind of clear is residents want more historic preservation, and what I like about the plan is that it outlines a way to make that happen, and it's very kind of doable action items, following best practices in historic preservation, and it's pretty exciting, I think, going forward. So I would like to see us kind of approve as is, but those are my thoughts on it.
All right. Anybody else?
I agree. Commissioner Fontenot, I agree with what Commissioner Brown said. I'm excited about this plan.
And just to confirm, you can make a motion to approve as is.
So we're going to make a motion to approve which? As is? As far as the ordinance going to the city?
Yes, it would be a motion to approve, as it reads here, the City of Corpus Christi Historic Preservation Plan, an element of Plan CC, comprehensive plan.
So I don't have to repeat that.
I believe one of the commissioners does have to repeat that.
Yeah, but
I'll make a motion to approve the Corpus Christi Historic Preservation Plan as is.
do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay.
So, pardon, Commissioner Wilson. So if one of us or two of us disagrees with that, where do we go?
We're going to take a vote on it
Okay.
at this point.
Yes, we'll go to discussion first.
Yeah. So let's open it for discussion. It sounds like we may have a dissenter.
All right. Veronica Wilson here. Yes, to all of those things in regards to how much work was. I don't agree with some of this. I think we need to think about the costs. And I know ultimately it will be up to the city council to make the final decisions on some of these strategies. But I don't think that we should put forth a document that says the Landmark Commission just thinks we should okay, this blank check, so to speak, and what that will ultimately mean. Because I don't agree with some of it. I don't agree with several strategies. And I don't know at that point how detailed I need to be, because there are 16 of them. So, but that's just off the top of my head what I have to say about it.
Mr. Chairperson, could I make one real quick comment about the plan and how it's going to work?
Yes, please go ahead, Steph.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So like every other plan that the city adopts, this is not prescriptive in that it does not obligate the city to do all of these things. It's a guidance document. So we're making recommendations in the plan, but the city may or may not choose to implement any or all of these strategies. Now, obviously, you if you didn't want to do any of them, it would be kind of silly to have the plan. But it also doesn't tell you exactly how you have to do things or how much you have to spend. So I'm getting from that that perhaps Commissioner Wilson is concerned about some of the economic recommendations, and that's completely fine. What I would say is that, let's say your concern is about a tax incentive. The plan really gives you some guidance to investigate potential tax exemption possibilities, and then work through the process with the community of deciding what those options are, which ones you're willing to pursue, what that would look like. And at that time, consider the financial implications and decide exactly what you might want to do or not do. So this plan doesn't obligate the city to spend any money on anything particular, but it does make recommendations for things that you should investigate as a city that's doing historic preservation in 2021. And that's all it is. So maybe that might alleviate some of Commissioner Wilson's concerns.
I think case in point, many of the recommendations of the previous two preservation plans were never adopted. This is kind of a roadmap of, things that we can do to increase historic preservation in Corpus Christi.
And just to clarify, there still is a motion on the floor.
A motion on the floor. I haven't heard a second yet.
I second that
You
motion.
did second the motion, okay. I think because we do have questions about this, I think we're going to call for a individual
Roll call vote? Sure.
roll call.
Before we get to that point, are we able to still discuss?
Yes.
some more?
Certainly.
Because I'm curious to hear, you said, you were unsure if you needed to go into too much detail, but I don't want to just blaze through something without hearing. Did what she offered help alleviate some of the concerns, or are there still specific ones I would like to hear if you're comfortable with sharing them?
No, not Brown.
Commissioner Freeman.
Commissioner Freeman, what he just said helped me a little bit more than what anybody else has said. The idea that this is really a roadmap more than it is anything else.
Really more of a guide.
Yes.
Nothing set in stone here.
That was a lot more helpful to hear than all of the specifics on the strategies. That said, what do we know about the history of past preservation plans that have been sent along, the last two? Do we know if former landmark commissions amended some of those before they sent those roadmaps out?
Yes, so in particular, the 1992 preservation plan had many drafts, and even council, I believe, spent 3 sessions approving that document. Once it was approved, it was then amended in 1999 and 2004. Those amendments specifically were mainly about focusing on other potential landmarks and looking around the city, and just as staff and other commissioners have stated, guiding the city to identify sites and other potential landmarks. That there was no kind of binding financial agreement in those amendments to this preservation plan. And even the 1994 preservation plan itself, it had a lot of recommendations and guidance, but no hard money, if you will. So
But where this is very broad, those were fairly specific in,
I would say that the 1994 plan was even more broad than this plan. This is specific strategies and goals that, if implemented by city staff or nonprofits or development organizations, using the research in the proposed plan has shown that it leads to, economic development or national historic places being designated. So it's kind of, it's guidance with proof in the pudding, if you will. Like, if you follow this roadmap, it's almost guaranteed to have this outcome. That makes sense?
yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question too? Just making sure.
My question, I guess, now is, should we talk about each strategy, or maybe just certain strategies that anybody on the commission might want to address more specifically, so that we can talk about amending one item, two items, however many items there are?
Yes.
Or do we just first just maybe get that rough vote from a roll call and then see where we go from there?
Well, I do believe the roll call vote, if we do have a majority, then the preservation plan would
Will
pass
go,
as
no
is.
matter what. Okay.
And I do see some commissioners discussing with you which strategies specifically you have maybe some thoughts about, or something that you would want to change, because one of the options is adoption with recommended amendments.
Okay. So then what are we saying? Are we doing that, or are we?
So right now, we're in discussion for a motion to adopt the preservation plan as is. Yes.
Okay, so may I call for the vote?
Yes, on that, the alternative, Commissioner Wilson, would basically be, if you wanted to propose a motion to accept the plan with amendments, I think there would need to be discussion leading into that as to what the amendments were, and then that motion and a second and a vote on that as an alternative path.
This motion can be rescinded.
Point of order, you could propose an amendment? Is that, or what is the?
It would be an approval of the preservation plan, but with conditions, if you will, or amendments. Is that correct?
What you would do is amend a specific section of the preservation plan, so you would set forth what your amendment would be.
Right, and I guess my point, or the thing I wanted to make sure is clear, I guess, to everyone, including myself, any discussion on specific points that you feel might influence the motion on the floor, if that is a route that you want to pursue, I think would make sense to have that discussion be part of, the discussion leading up into this vote. So for instance, if there are specific points that you feel you would like an amendment to, I think having, that discussion now as an influence to the motion that's on the floor would be, say, beneficial to your cause.
Which is really difficult, because it being a general roadmap that could be ultimately ignored on many points, I don't know how long I want to keep us here going through each and every little item. But let's just take, for instance, strategy 4. Since we know that the state already has something that's already coming down the line that's in line with this, does that necessarily need to be in here? Just as a broad example.
And Commissioner Wilson, this is Steph McDougall. A discussion of disaster recovery and resilience and preparedness was part of our scope of work. So, so that's in the the plan specifically because the city required it. I think that there are things in there that are helpful for the city to consider, but certainly that's something that you all could decide to not include if you wanted to.
I know strategy 16 doesn't specifically state within the actual written strategy itself the courthouse. But since it's mentioned so very much, do we need to address this? Do we need to talk about this?
Well, maybe, but, you know, we don't own the building. The city doesn't own the building. And it is part of our history and our culture, and it's very dysfunctional right now. We don't know where this building is gonna go, but at least mentioning it and partnering with, if you would, with the county and tax abatements and ways that we can assist them in how, whatever they decide to do with this thing, I think is the right thing to do. So that's pretty much why it's mentioned, I think.
And Commissioner Wilson, we're recommending that the city choose some demonstration projects. We give the Ritz and the county courthouse as examples, but this doesn't require that the city use either one of those. We're just showing if, you know, those examples received the highest support from the community. And so we're discussing in that plan how it would work should the city decide to move forward with one or both of those.
Well, when you say the highest support from the community, you mean specifically the highest support from the 700 to 800 people that actually responded to your questionnaire, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, not
And that
necessarily
is
the
a-
community.
That is a survey that's statistically valid at 95% confidence level with an 8% margin of error.
Yeah, because I would hate for us to send off to the city council a kind of message that, you know, because when you read this, all of your wonderful work, the Ritz and the Nueces County Courthouse are specifically named. And I wonder if perhaps maybe that needs to be taken out, because someone from the council or other people from the city will read that and they might not feel the same way that those 800 people felt, or however many of them were in favor while they were filling out the survey. And, you know, where some people might see county and city partnership, others might see county and city double dipping from the taxpayer. And so I think if we're going to pass it on to the city with this type of project cited specifically in it, and we want it to be a clear roadmap that somebody might actually want to drive on, we need to be sensitive to that. Just my thoughts.
Would it be acceptable to amend language to say state catalytic projects such as, amongst others, and so we wouldn't be excluding any other potential projects?
If you think that that's
Would that
appropriate.
satisfy your concern related to that? In other words, the two that were cited in the survey, you know, sort of the top two, would still remain, but we could introduce some language that would essentially say that, you know, there are potentially other projects that could be considered as catalytic projects. Would that
I think that would
avail
help
your
put it
concern?
Okay?
Yes.
Okay, and just to be clear on the language, this would be specifically for strategy 16 when mentioning the Ritz and the Nueces County Courthouse as demonstration projects.
And Craig, I think specifically that's action item 61, which says make a demonstrable commitment to the preservation of the Ritz Theater and Old Courthouse. We could certainly soften the language in that to make that like Nina said, more of an example, and mention, the possibility of other demonstration projects as alternatives. We don't have any other demonstration project alternatives that we've worked up, just to be clear.
Okay. Thank you.
And Steph, on the windstorm strategy number 4, so I think the question, just to be clear, is that the state is coming up with a program where we could participate? Is that correct?
That's correct. The state already has a program established that other cities like Galveston and Brownsville use. And so the city of Corpus Christi would not be reinventing that wheel. It would just be adopting that program for your own property owners.
So that would be through, would that be just working with the state, or would that be through a city ordinance?
We've discussed that. I am not sure if the city would need to adopt an ordinance to create that program. I'm guessing that it would, but I don't know for sure. The city attorney probably would want to weigh in on what would be required.
So
I believe that our planning commission can adopt our building ordinances to simply include that for these historic buildings, that they're going to have an exemption on their storm windows and roof construction.
So at some level, we would still need to participate and coordinate with the state.
Yes, that's correct.
And how is that strategy stated specifically?
Action item number 13, create a windstorm exemption program for historic properties using the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association process with the Texas Historical Commission, currently in use in Galveston and Brownsville.
And so what is the objection again, Commissioner? I'm sorry.
It was an example of like maybe redundancy.
Oh, it was just redundancy. Well, I guess my comment as historic preservation officer is I didn't even know that program existed. So I think it's great to just reiterate that in the plan so that people know about, if we continue to coordinate with the state on this, people are aware of it. So I think that would be a good reason to retain that in the plan.
I can tell you that I was the chair of my own local historic commission for several years and served on the commission for about 6 years. And we weren't aware of it for many years. We knew it was in Galveston. We didn't realize that it included all of Galveston County, which includes us. So I think, anything that you do that can make that sort of thing more visible to city officials, to property owners, also to building officials who need to know that's something they might have to look at, I think is a good thing.
All right, any other discussions? Any other items you want to? Is it good now? For now.
Okay, so we still do have the original motion.
We still have the original motion. Do you want to make any amendments to the motion, or you want?
So discussions for the original motion, you can rescind that motion, and then we can have a new motion which includes the amendment to action item 61, which would make clear that the Ritz and the Nueces County Courthouse are examples of. Is that correct? So that you have two options here, either same motion or. Yeah.
I make a motion to rescind the first motion, to accept it without any changes.
I think that a person who made the motion would need to make the rescinding motion.
Which was,
I'll rescind the motion.
There you go.
Okay.
That's simple enough. Now, do we have a new motion to accept the preservation plan with the new language as stated?
Commissioner Fontenot, I make a motion to accept the preservation plan with the amendment to action item 61, changing the language to make it clear that the Ritz and the Nueces County Courthouse are examples, not the definitive set ones.
Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Okay. So may we have a roll call vote?
Sure, I just wanted to double check if any other commissioners may have joined the WebEx meeting after roll call. I see that, is it still our Commissioner Mendez and Commissioner De La Garza are the ones on the WebEx? Okay, just wanting to confirm that. Okay, so roll call. I have Chair Robbins as not present. Vice Chairman Dees?
For it, yes.
Okay. Commissioner Freeman?
4.
Commissioner De La Garza? I'm not sure if you may need to unmute yourself, Commissioner De La Garza.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, thank you.
Oh, okay, yes, 4.
Okay, great. Commissioner Fontenot?
4.
Commissioner Brown?
4.
Commissioner Mendez?
4.
Commissioner Wanzer is absent? And Commissioner...
No, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant when I was asking if anybody else entered the meeting after roll call. So what was your vote, Commissioner
No, I
Wanzer?
was here, yeah, I was here during roll call.
Okay, I just didn't hear you. You may have been muted. Okay, was your vote aye?
It's R.
4, okay, great. And Commissioner Wilson? Okay, motion passes.
All right. I totally agree. All right, Nina, may we have a Historic Preservation Officer's report?
Good evening, Nina Nixon Mendez, Historic Preservation Officer and Assistant Director Development Services. Glad to see everyone in person and also online today. As you know, and as was described in the presentation, this is a recommendation to City Council that will go forward. The Planning Commission will also host a public hearing on this item in August, and then both of those recommendations would go forward to City Council in September. We're probably targeting September the 14th for that date, but we do want to see, certainly the action that the Planning Commission also takes on the preservation plan. I do want to report on the City Bakery local designation that, the mayor had mentioned back in our National Preservation Month proclamation. There is an item being placed on the City Council agenda for July 27th to initiate a local historic landmark designation for that property. The property owner is consenting to that designation. And so if City Council initiates the rezoning for the property, then Landmark Commission will see this in August in a public hearing. And of course, our designation, it's just like any other zoning case. Property owners within 200 feet would receive a notice, and then of course we have our published notices. So anyway, I did want to let you know that is moving forward. And that's all I have to report. Craig, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
I just have a question. Have we heard from the people of the Bayview Cemetery?
No, we haven't, but we can certainly contact them and see if they might be available for August or September.
Okay, that would be nice. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do we have any future items? We don't have any demolitions or any?
On the radar, there's no demolitions, no inquiries of demolitions, hopefully just designations in the future, so.
Okay.
No future items. Yes, sir.
What, where are we at on the Steamboat House?
In discussion with Parks and Recreation and also engineering, we do know that the architectural drawings are almost done or have been completed, or close to being completed. So
They're
that can be
close.
that can be shared with Landmark Commission once we do receive the drawings. Next is, I do believe there's still discussion about someone acquiring the Steamboat House
Relocation.
and possibly moving it. I think that's the discussion currently. Kind of the same place it was about a year and 2 months ago. So,
Very nice. Commissioners, anybody have anything else?
Anymore with any, I know they had some changeover. We had spoken maybe a year and a half ago at this point about potentially having someone, when there was somebody in that position, to come give kind of a broad overview of the status of the different houses in Heritage Park, and I'm still interested in working on that or having someone come speak to us if there is somebody available to do that.
Yeah, I know that there has been a master plan initiated for Heritage Park. I don't know where they are at that point, but I can look into it. I know that the planning department was also helping with that, so we can inquire about that.
Can we have somebody from Parks and Rec give that update on that report next meeting?
yes, yeah. If not next meeting, whenever they're available.
September, okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But I think that's something we certainly should pursue. Okay. I make a motion, we adjourn.
Commissioner Fontenot, I second the motion.
Great. Adjourned. Thank you all very much for being here. Yep. And Steph, thank you so much if you're still there.
Thanks,
Thank you, Steph.
Commissioners.
Thank you.